Everything you know about Star Wars is wrong. On this episode, Legends was never canon. Choco, why? Why are we talking about this?
It's just something that always comes up, you know. People will say, "Oh, this breaks canon," and then you're like, "Oh, how so? What in canon does it break?" And then they're like, "Well, right here in Legends." Like, listen, I love Legends. I feel confident in saying I've read more Legends than 99% of people on the planet, more than most people should. And I love it, and I love the characters, and it's had a fantastic time. But I always understood that that wasn't canon, and that those things that I read there, George Lucas was not beholden to them. He didn't have to put them in any films. And even later, and it was just a good thing, because there was some ridiculous stuff in Legends. There was the weird bug creature that had mouths on its chest, and if you made out with its mouth, you would get younger. That was a thing in Star Wars. We don't need we don't need that mess.
That reminds me of Sybil.
I don't know what that is.
She was a mind witch that she could suck the life out of like. So Han, Leia, and Luke in particular happened upon her after she had drained the life from like a platoon of stormtroopers, and after she did that, she was young again. And there's this whole thing about Luke being seduced by her as a young witch. But, you know, he breaks free. I'm breaking free. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, in Legends, in Legends, Boba Fett escaped the Sarlacc because it literally just burped and it shot him out. But he hit his head and he forgot who he was, and the Jawas thought he was a robot, and so they took him. And then he helped. The Jawas also took R2, and so they helped. He thought he didn't know who he was, so he helped Han Solo and Leia get R2 back. And in the meanwhile, the Sandcrawler got out of control, and it crashed into the Sarlacc, and he flew out and back into the Sarlacc. And that's why he was hit. Like, it was wild. But the thing is, it was never canon. It was never meant to be canon. It's always been very clear that it was two different worlds, and everyone who is capable of deciding what is and isn't canon will tell you the same thing. Now, Lucasfilm does have an official answer. It's a reader's companion to the expanded universe. It is the final and definitive answer. It came out before Disney bought Star Wars, and it's the whole purpose of this book is this is how we view Legends, and it clearly states that none of those things enter in canon.
We'll be able to read it. I do want to touch on the Dapper DM's comments. The old canon hierarchy was wild, and that is also something that is often misconstrued and mischaracterized as Leland Chee's tier list of canons was always a list of different canons. They were not like levels of canon. So you had G-canon, that was George Lucas's prime canon, and you had everything else. You had a T-canon, you had a C-canon, and an S-canon, and anything that was an S-canon or T-canon or C-canon was not part of George Lucas's canon. It was its own canon based on George Lucas's canon. And to go back to Choco's point, I'm going to bring up the Reader's Companion and we can all read it together. You probably won't be able to see it, Choco, but that means
I could probably read it verbatim.
All right, so I'll start reading it and then see if you can jump off from there if you remember it. The most definitive canon of the Star Wars universe is encompassed by the feature films and television productions in which George Lucas is directly involved. The movies and the Clone Wars television series are what he and his hand-picked writers reference when adding cinematic adventures to the Star Wars oeuvre. But Lucas allows for an expanded universe that exists parallel to the one he directly oversees. In many cases, the stewards of the expanded universe, editors within the licensing division of Lucasfilm Limited, who work with authors and publishers, will ask for his input or blessing on projects. Though these stories may get his stamp of approval, they don't enter his canon unless they are depicted cinematically in one of his projects.
I do want to pause there because that's something I do hear a lot. And people will be like, well, George Lucas approved this, therefore it's canon. George Lucas worked with them on The Force Unleashed, therefore it's canon. It's not. And in fact, they used to have to take down anything Force Unleashed related whenever George entered a room. Later on, it was kind of funny.
But here's also something that I want to read as part of that section, just for people who love Legends. That said, unless something occurs in a canon project or directly contradicts a published source, it can be reliably said to have occurred. Extensive records track the growth of the EU, cataloging planets, characters, technology, or events to allow for a sprawling, believable continuity connecting the published works for the Star Wars universe. It's not perfect. When errors occur, the companion does sometimes call them out. This is not to diminish these tales in any way, but rather to illustrate that the Star Wars Expanded Universe is a living document that grows and evolves over time. The Reader's Companion is not meant as a replacement for the experience of reading these works firsthand. Those truly interested in the stories are strongly encouraged to read them whole, no matter how detailed. A summary is no substitute for experiencing a story as the author intended it.
Yeah, and so that is, I mean, that the title of the section is Canon and Continuity. So the whole point is the stories are in continuity despite not being canon. And as long as it didn't directly interfere with canon, you could reliably say it happened. That's just no longer the case. And my thing with this conversation piece is that most of the reason that this is a discussion piece is because people want to be mad at Disney, right? Because if you recognize that, oh, this was never canon in the first place, then you can't be mad at that for not being done, for certain things being changed, right? It removes that spite. But additionally, a lot of people grew up on this stuff. I myself did. It was actually, it was funny. It was a really hot girl that actually turned me on to Star Wars books in the first place.
Wait, did she turn you on and then?
I mean, a little column A, a little column B. But she was like, I was talking to this girl about Star Wars, and she was like, yeah, they go into like the fighting styles and stuff of the characters, and I just really like it. And I was like, oh, word? And that changed my life. But people, what I want you to know is you're not losing these stories. You haven't lost them. If anything, they're more accessible now than they've ever been before. They're being re-released. You know, there's a lot of low cards in that deck, but the best ones are being re-released. If you're an audiobook fan, they're getting re-recorded in high quality with sound effects and all that. You don't have to listen to the old ones where the guy's like, and then he went back to Coruscant. Because those were terrible. You know, it's awesome.
Yeah. Finally, I do want to raise the all-powerful voice of Dave Filoni himself.
It's a funny thing, having been here a while and actually telling Star Wars stories. I'm in a very odd, unique position, which is that there's this notion that everything changed and when everything became Legends, and I can see why people think that. But you know, having worked with George, I can tell you that it was always very clear, and he made it very clear, that the films and the TV shows were the only thing that he considered canon. That was it. Mm-hmm. So everything else was a world of fun ideas, exciting characters, great possibilities, but the EU was created to explore all those things. And I know, and I fully respect people's opinion about it, that some of the material said the next canon part of it, okay, but from the filmmaking world that I was brought into, the TV series, the films were it. Mm-hmm. They were set in stone. So it was not a big change for me when everyone was saying everything's Legend status now. I'm like, yeah, that's what I've always understood. It's all Legend status. what I've been able to do on Clone Wars is the same thing that George was doing in the prequels, which is, George liked Aayla Secura. Aayla Secura gets pulled out of the comic books, and now she's walking in the Jedi Temple. In Clone Wars, there were several things from the expanded universe that, hey, we need a gang. We need another kind of mafia group, not just the Hutts. Okay, Black Sun. What about Black Sun? Let's look at that. That exists. And I've always leaned towards if we're going to create something, we should check and see if it existed already to the fans, because it has way more value if we bring that in. And It's like, why would I just replace it with something new? So if we're going to do an admiral, if we're going to do a big military leader, I could create a new guy, sure. But what about Thrawn? Thrawn is great. Thrawn is a character we all know. Thrawn has a lot of credibility. So
in large part, you saying that he had always understood under George Lucas's tutelage that Legends was always Legends. Like these EU stories were always kind of like, as Kent Kari says in our YouTube chat, myths like King Arthur, Atlantis, Dracula, all great and good stories. They're all reliably to have said to have occurred, but if something is depicted on screen or in film or in the new canon that contradicts it, then it was never. That's the truth of it. It's the same thing with talking about Ki-Adi-Mundi's birthday, being from a Star Wars Insider book that is just, no one knows about it, but because of Wikipedia, that it's an aggregator of all information. The information is there, but nobody knew about that birthday.
Yeah, and this is always it's always been the case. One of the things I love is the behind the scenes from the Clone Wars that we get, and if you watch those behind the scenes, they make it painfully clear that the expanded universe wasn't canon. There's even a part where the Zygerian slaver arc happened in the comics first, and he brought that writer over in order to help with that episode, but they did change a bunch of things. And in the behind the scenes, Dave Filoni specifically says, because the author used to work on the Clone Wars, he actually put a lot of stuff in there that allowed this to be told using their medium in canon. Some things had to be changed. It also had the most disgusting outfit for Ahsoka. It was really gross. Same thing would happen with all the Mandalorian lore. George just took a big old jump on it to the point where Karen Traviss couldn't finish her book series. She was literally in the middle of her series. I had another book left to go, but Attack of the Clones came out, and he irrevocably changed Mandalorians and clones and made sure that Jango Fett and Boba Fett were not Mandalorians, and it just killed the book. So it couldn't go on any further. It's not new. It's always been how it is.